Warning, be advised. This is a Vermilion-level classified special operations zone. The picked feeds are gone. Vox relays crackle with delay. Auspex readouts flash impossible readings before defaulting to silence. Nothing connects. The silence isn't just absence, it's proof. Proof that something happened large enough to erase the evidence of its own arrival. You're standing in the aftermath of a deployment that was never recorded, a conflict that wasn't sanctioned. Burned out hab blocks still bleed heat from cracked ferrocrete foundations. Plasteel melts where it shouldn't. Ceramite plating, meant to hold against orbital fire, has ruptured like it was peeled open by precision instruments wielded in rage. Shell casings lie in clusters too uniform for human combat doctrine. There are no bodies, only patterns, precision, speed, a language written in impact craters and shattered auger arrays. Something killed everything here and did it clean. But this wasn't extermination, this was testing. Across a broken manufactorum wall, the sigil of the Adeptus Astartes is half erased by low smoke and soot. Next to it, barely visible under a layer of scorched metal, the seal of the Mechanicus has been reapplied. Fresh, red, undamaged. That's the only mark untouched. That's the only thing whoever did this wanted you to see. This isn't a war zone. This is a crime scene sealed by the guilty. There are rumors. There are always rumors. Of a figure clad in prototype Mark 10 armor before Mark 10 even existed. Of a Space Marine who doesn't speak, doesn't lead, doesn't break formation. Because there is no formation to break. He moves like he knows the fight before it begins. Deployments logged after the fact refer to unidentified Allied combat assets. Discrepancies in kill counts. Entire squads of enemy combatants neutralized before the assigned kill teams arrived. And sometimes a robed Mechanicus emissary walking behind a lone figure too large, too quiet, too wrong to be standard issue. Those stories never reach the upper strata of the noosphere. They linger in barracks, slip into debriefs that aren't fully redacted. But every time, someone deletes the logs, someone wipes the surveillance, and the only thing left behind is the damage. And the absence. We are in that absence now, the edge of knowledge, the place lore avoids, the moment before a name becomes history. What Cawl attempted was not science, it was resurrection by another name. There is no thunder when the machine god blinks, no ceremony when heresy is born. In the depths beneath Mars, within the vaults that even fabricators fear to name, something was made. Not discovered, not rediscovered, but made. And it did not belong. This was no iterative design. No extrapolated form from existing templates. What emerged was not the result of centuries of Martian refinement, but a single act of apocalyptic ambition, the attempted recreation of the Emperor's own forgotten miracle. Alpha Primus was Cawl's blasphemy in progress, his private war against mortality, waged with tools the Imperium had forbidden even to dream of. He wasn't engineered as a soldier, he was sculpted as a question. What happens when a mortal man dares to step into the blueprint once held only by the master of mankind? This wasn't the Primaris project, not yet. That would come after. What Cawl attempted first, quietly, beneath sigil-locked data looms and recursive seals, was the impossible. He sought to unlock the Emperor's creation code, not just to enhance Space Marines, to recreate the Primarch process itself. The effort failed. Not because the technology broke, not because the organs failed to take, but because what emerged was something else. Alpha Primus, the first and only of his kind. Not a Primarch, not an Astartes, something between, something wrong. Too complete to terminate, too broken to replicate. Cawl didn't delete the data, he buried it, and instead of abandoning the failure, he pivoted. What was meant to be the next generation of demigods was reclassified, scaled down, contained, repurposed. The Primaris Astartes were born from that compromise, lethal, loyal, better than their forebears in most measurable ways, but sanitized, usable, Codex compliant, not Alpha Primus. He could not be reproduced. The process that made him, a cracked mirror of the Emperor's gene forging, was already slipping away, collapsing under the weight of its own ambition. The knowledge was unrepeatable. The result, unmanageable. So Cawl did what any god-tier engineer in a theocracy would do when confronted with an inconvenient miracle. He kept it, alive, silent, operational, and never admitted it happened. Not truly, because Alpha Primus was too much. Not just stronger, not just faster, but fundamentally outside the moral framework the Imperium had built for its creations. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a tool. He was a question that still moved, and every time he draws breath, that question sharpens. If this is what came before the Primaris, what else was left in the dark? Standard gene seed is sacred. Each chapter guards its origin as both relic and identity, descendants of Guilliman, Russ, Dawn, or otherwise. That singular genetic thread, gifted from the Emperor through the Primarchs, defines everything from combat doctrine to psychic tolerance. To tamper with it is to risk mutation. To mix it is to risk damnation. Cawl mixed it anyway. Alpha Primus was never meant to conform to the legacy of a single gene line. His genetic core is a chimera, synthesized from the fragments of multiple legions, traces of the lion's wrath, echoes of Vulcan's resilience, the psychic volatility of Magnus, possibly more, possibly all. This wasn't an accident. It was an ambition. Cawl wasn't building a successor. He was trying to reconstruct the creative act itself, the very process the Emperor used to forge the Primarchs. And in doing so, he violated the core law of Astartes continuity. No legion shall be blended. The result was Alpha Primus. No known chapter claims him. No gene seed vault records his source, because there is no source. There are only samples, stitched together by experimental catalysts and enforced through recursive rewriting of the host's cellular architecture, not simply implanted, overwritten, rewritten until nothing original remained. The process left him stable, but not whole, functional, but alien. His immune responses don't match any existing baseline. His organ array includes theoretical augmentations never observed outside of pre-heresy black sites. Even his osmodula, the bone growth organ, behaves differently, layering plated reinforcements that mimic pre-ceramite proto-armor. And then there's the mind, not merely adaptive, not just enhanced, something more, a psychoneural interface far beyond any librarian protocol. Alpha Primus does not access the warp the way sanctioned psychers do. He doesn't reach out. The warp bends toward him, folds around him in localized harmonics. He doesn't summon, he draws, and that's the problem, because the warp doesn't bend to mortal will, not even to Astartes, unless what's bending it is no longer entirely mortal. Alpha Primus walks a threshold, not a demon host, not a corrupted entity, but something convergent. The result of biological multiplicity pressed into a single vessel, over-engineered past the point of standard psychic resistance. The purity seals couldn't hold, so they were never applied. He is the reason Primaris psychers remain tightly monitored. He is the reason no other chimeric warriors have ever been attempted, because Alpha Primus didn't break containment, he simply survived it. And that survival leaves a scar, not on him, on everything that came after. Because once you realize the Primaris template came from a prototype built of every gene line, you have to ask what part of them still carries his echo. Not a bloodline, a shadow. The Primaris Space Marines were unveiled to the galaxy as evolution made manifest, taller, faster, stronger, immune to many of the flaws that haunted their predecessors. They were heralded as Cawl's triumph, the Emperor's vision, refined. But none of that was true. The truth stood beside them, silent, unrepeated, unrevealed. Alpha Primus, not their kin, their source. He is not more than a Primaris. He is before. Not a soldier upgraded through careful gene alchemy, but a being torn apart and rebuilt on the most intimate level imaginable. Where the Primaris received improvements, Alpha Primus endured transformation. Where they gained organs, he lost identity. Where they trained to master power, he became dependent on it. He was not implanted, he was rewritten. On a molecular level, every cell in his body is a cipher. Each one bears alterations beyond replication. Cawl himself has admitted, He no longer understands the full process. The data that created Alpha Primus is gone, purged by time, war, accident, or by Cawl's own hand. The failure was too perfect. Alpha Primus's musculature isn't just enhanced, it's interwoven with electro-nerve webs that act as secondary reflex layers. His reaction time exceeds known Astartes standards by a measurable factor. His skin, though human in appearance, possesses hybrid qualities that mimic pre-armor trauma-dampening layers. And yet, he is in constant pain. Every moment of his existence is agony. The integration process that forged him succeeded only by burning away every comfort of his human frame. Organs that cannot rest, a nervous system that never fully resets, motion that feels like tearing, even when it doesn't. The pain does not debilitate him. It defines him, it drives him. It makes him the one thing the Primaris were never allowed to be. A weapon without mediation. No chaplain to direct his faith. No codex to dictate his moves. No origin to claim. No name to speak in formation. He is not a warrior made to serve. He is a being forced to act, because to be still is to suffer. Even the warp recoils from that kind of pain. And yet, his psychic profile flares brighter than any sanctioned Astartes psyker alive. Not because of talent, because of need. Because every scream he doesn't voice becomes another blade of power. In that way, Alpha Primus exceeds even the most venerated of his lineage. Not in scale, not in strength, in absence. The Primaris were given structure, rank, honor. He was given pain, a directive, and a void where his legacy should be. He is not a successor. He is the outline of what could never be finished. And Cawl knew it. Because when you create something that you cannot repeat, you do not try again. You lock the door, and you listen to see if it moves anyway. The Astartes are the Emperor's angels, biological cathedrals of loyalty, raised to venerate his will through fire and war. Even the most independent chapters, the most divergent foundings, retain the genetic echo of that loyalty. But Alpha Primus never swore such fealty. He never had to. Because Alpha Primus does not see himself as a son of the Emperor. He sees himself as property of Cawl. It's not a metaphor, not ideology. In recorded interactions, Alpha Primus speaks of himself not as a warrior of the Imperium, not even as a tool of mankind's salvation, but as a thing Cawl made, a possession, a unique creation that exists to serve its creator, not its species, not its god, not its genetic ancestors. This is not servitude, it's identity. Alpha Primus is not lost. He is anchored, not to the Imperium, but to a single figure within it. And Belisarius Cawl, for all his holy titles and monstrous ambitions, has never corrected him, never denied ownership, because he understands what the Imperium would not, that Alpha Primus is not an Astartes. He is a construct of allegiance, unconditional, unquestioning, not driven by faith in the divine, driven by design. This bond is not beautiful, it is grotesque, it is dependency without affection, trust without intimacy, a chained engine offering gratitude to the one who forged its restraints, and it terrifies those who understand what it implies. Because if Alpha Primus owes nothing to the Emperor, nothing to the Imperium, and nothing to mankind, then what does it mean when he acts on Cawl's behalf? What do his choices mean when they are not moral, strategic, or ideological, but simply the extension of another's will? He has told others he is not to be trusted, that Cawl does not seek power, but that his methods demand caution, that there are forces at play even he does not fully comprehend. This isn't a betrayal. It's a warning issued from inside the weapon itself. Primus does not serve the galaxy. He does not fight for hope or for order or for vengeance. He serves Cawl, because Cawl made him capable of doing so. That's the scar no gene seed can hide. And as long as Cawl lives, Alpha Primus moves, not in freedom, but in alignment. And if Cawl ever falls, if that presence is removed, what remains will not be a man. It will be a memory built to obey, with no one left to command it. The Adeptus Astartes know pain as a tool, training scars, combat trauma, the agony of transformation during implantation. It shapes them, refines them, but it does not define them. Alpha Primus is different. Pain is not his rite of passage. It is his constant state, The process that made him, experimental, chimeric, rushed through the limitations of doctrine and reason, did not settle. It burned. Rewrote tissue not in harmony, but in conflict. The result is a being at war with itself on a cellular level. Every step tears, every breath drags, every psychic impulse flickers against nerves not meant to endure his presence. This isn't weakness, it's architecture. Cawl didn't anticipate the recursive backlash of combining gene seed from multiple legions. The Emperor's original bioalchemy maintained cohesion by crafting each Primarch as a singular vessel, internally aligned, designed for stability. Cawl's method bypassed understanding for outcome, and the outcome was unstable. Not mentally, physically. Primus walks with grace, speaks with clarity, fights with precision, but every motion costs him. He bleeds under the skin. His pain threshold is not enhanced, it's disabled, not dulled, fully present, and he endures it without failure. That pain has side effects. It supercharges his psychic field. Astartes' psychers are rare, controlled, their minds sharpened by discipline and mutation. But Primus's abilities were not trained. They erupted, a side effect of cellular misalignment triggering latent warp receptivity. His pain echoes into the Imperium, not as a scream, but as a signal. The warp doesn't whisper to him, it listens. That's why Cawl never deactivated him. Because Alpha Primus is not merely a failed attempt, he is a functional singularity. His agony fuels precision. It hones his reflexes, forces his focus. Every second he doesn't collapse is a second more of unrelenting mastery. He does not tolerate pain, he outpaces it. There are accounts, uncited, unconfirmed, of Alpha Primus walking through null fields without degradation, of him suppressing demonic presence with thought alone, not through willpower, through attrition. Because what demon could hope to unmake a mind already shattered into perfect, obedient fragments? This is not resilience, it's feedback. A cycle of purpose, pain, and psychic amplification that keeps him moving long after most warriors would have begged for stasis. And when questioned about it, rarely quietly, he never curses Cawl, never blames the process. He doesn't speak of the pain as torment. He calls it clarity, because it reminds him he's not a Primarch, not a Marine, not a man, only the prototype, still alive, still hurting, still useful. Alpha Primus does not speak often. His words are measured, chosen with surgical precision. There are no sermons, no declarations. But when he does speak, those who hear him remember. Captain Vitrian Messinius, summoned aboard the Tsar Quaesitor, would not forget. There were no vox orders, no intermediaries. One moment, Messinius stood among thousands of warriors preparing for deployment. The next, he was standing before Alpha Primus, led there not by summons, but by force of thought, pulled psychically, as if his presence had been written into Primus's design. What followed wasn't a revelation, it was a warning. Alpha Primus told Messinius not to trust everything Cawl says, not to believe in every motive behind the miracle, not to mistake creation for righteousness, and yet he made no accusation, no rebellion. In the same breath, he declared that Cawl had no desire for power, that the Archmagos, for all his ambition, sought only the salvation of mankind. This wasn't contradiction, it was context. Primus was telling Messinius that truth and danger can exist in the same breath. That purity of intent is not protection from the cost of unchecked power. That even a savior might create something too large to be contained. He was speaking from experience. Because he is that something. The Primaris Marines, the Rubicon process, the entirety of Cawl's grand expansion. None of it would exist without Alpha Primus. He knows what was lost to make it possible. He remembers the void between success and sanctification. And in that silence, he speaks, not to destroy trust, but to warn those who have inherited his shadow. It was never about loyalty, it was about awareness. Alpha Primus sees Cawl as his maker, not as a god, not as a master, but as origin. And in that bond, he holds a clarity others lack. The knowledge that salvation by design is still design, that the shape of a tool is not proof of its virtue, Masinius walked away, changed. He never said exactly how. Only that Primus's words rang louder in his mind after the conversation ended, as if they had been set to detonate later. That's the other danger. Alpha Primus does not just warn, he plants understanding. Delayed insights, thoughts that only sharpen when war is near. Messages not meant to explain, but to awaken. He doesn't argue. He prepares you for something worse, something he can't stop, something he was never meant to stop. Because warnings are not walls. They're signposts left behind by someone who already walked through the fire and knows the flames are still coming. After the opening of the Great Rift, the galaxy tore itself into screaming halves. The Astronomicon flickered. Faith wavered. Communications collapsed. In that chaos, many were lost, some to warp storms, others to silence. One was retrieved. A senior Ordo Xenos Inquisitor had disappeared. No trace, no distress signal, presumed dead. His last known location, a Necron prison crypt, buried beneath a dormant tomb world. No mission was assigned, no strike force dispatched. The risk was too high. Cawl sent him. Alpha Primus didn't drop from orbit. He didn't storm the gates. He entered alone, silent, unrecorded, unassisted. And what he found wasn't just a body. It was being fed upon. The thing consuming the Inquisitor wasn't Necron technology. It resembled an enslaver, an ancient warp-born parasite known for hijacking psychers and opening doorways to madness. Except this one didn't react to Alpha Primus the way it should have. It didn't lunge. It withdrew, as if it recognized something older, not human, not prey, but precedent. Primus terminated it. No rites, no void cleansing, just erasure. There are no records of what he did with the body, no confirmation the Inquisitor was returned. Only that the tomb world went dark afterward, cold, still. A Mechanicus Skitarii survey team sent months later reported neural interference across all units. Their augurs showed no enemies, just pressure, as if something was still down there. That's not the only shadow run. Alpha Primus was later sighted, briefly, indistinctly, on Sotha during Cawl's expedition to the ruins of the Pharos. The psychic beacon, once used by the Ultramarines during the Great Crusade, was long dead. Or so it was thought. Cawl wanted data. More than that, he wanted memory. Remnants of Imperium Secundus. Hints of impossible technologies. Alpha Primus did not guard the expedition. He guided it, moved ahead of the team, interacted with no one, scanned no terrain. But the path he walked led them to sealed vaults no Auspex had located. Doors opened for him that refused Cawl's access codes. No right, no override, just presence. The implication was unavoidable. Alpha Primus knows things he was never told. Possibly not by design, possibly by inheritance, because if Cawl succeeded, even partially, in mimicking the process that made the Primarchs, then Alpha Primus may carry more than genes. He may carry echoes, buried instincts, lost permissions, access built into his marrow, not coded but remembered. That's why he's used sparingly. Why no mission log ever bears his name. Because Alpha Primus doesn't just complete objectives, he collects history, pieces that don't belong to this era, doors that shouldn't open, monsters that look at him and remember. He is not just sent where others can't go, he is sent where no one else should. And when he returns, he brings nothing. No trophies, no explanations, only silence, and a trail of locks no longer sealed. It happened aboard the Tsar Quesita, Cawl's Sanctum Ark and floating laboratory, the mobile cathedral of all that came from the Primaris project. A fortress of data and design, guarded by gene-engineered monstrosities and logic-locked defense grids. It should have been impenetrable, but Fabius Bile has never obeyed rules. When his forces struck, the Mechanicus believed he wanted the Sanctum Primus Portum, a vault housing what many believe to be remnants of Primarch genetic code. A target worthy of a twisted genius like Bile. A distraction worthy of his reputation. It was never his goal. Bile didn't want potential. He wanted the original. He wanted Alpha Primus. There was no glorious duel, no last stand. Bile's creations, post-human freaks bound by unstable enhancements and cloned rage, swarmed like a virus. Primus fought them. Of course he did. And he killed them, shattered them. But the attack wasn't meant to win in combat. It was meant to siphon. They overwhelmed him, not in strength but in volume. Held him long enough. Wounded him deep enough. Forced his systems into failure mode. And when the opportunity opened, bile cut him open. Tore his progenoid glands from his body. The implication was blasphemous. Because in Astartes biology, the progenoids hold the genetic templates, the reproducible core of a warrior's legacy. They are harvested after death to continue the line. Alpha Primus was never meant to have his taken, because there was no line. There was only one. Cawl arrived too late to stop it, cornered Bile, demanded the return of what had been stolen, but Bile had prepared for that too. Alpha Primus, he revealed, had been outfitted with a mutagenic failsafe, a chemical time bomb coded into his modified biology. If Bile was killed, it would activate. Mutate Primus beyond salvation. Destroy the only working trace of the original prototype in the galaxy. Cawl froze. He let Bile walk. There was no choice. The cost was too high. Alpha Primus had to survive. Not because of sentiment, not because of strategy, but because he was irreplaceable. Bile disappeared into the void, progenoids in hand, cackling at the irony. The Imperium's greatest genetic innovation had been harvested by its most reviled genetic heretic. And yet, Primus survived, his body reknit, slowly, imperfectly, but enough. He rose, scarred, altered, not in strength, in context. For the first time, Alpha Primus had been diminished, not defeated, not broken, but touched in a way that could not be undone. He had been valued, used, seen not as property, not as ghost, not as secret, but as currency. That's what changed. Not his loyalty, not his purpose, his status. The prototype was no longer forgotten. Now he was hunted, and somewhere in the darkness, Bile is experimenting, cloning, extracting, trying to rebuild what even Cawl could not. But it doesn't matter, because no matter what grows in Bile's vats, there will never be another Alpha Primus, because the prototype isn't defined by what made him. He's defined by what he endured.